If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Security guard who worked the night shift, what's the creepiest/scariest thing you've witnessed? Campus security here. One of the buildings I patrol regularly has problems with the lighting. Half the ceiling lights in the whole place will often be out, creating a mess of long, dark, usually silent hallways. There are doors lining the sides and large windows at the ends. Typical horror movie stuff that I got used to after a couple weeks. But recently, while walking down one of those halls, I kept seeing flickering movement behind me as I approached the window. I stopped, clicked on my flashlight, and turned around to find, you guessed it, nothing. At this point, though, my radio started getting interference. Loud static burst from my hip, and after climbing down from the ceiling I turned the volume down and continued my round. As I approached the window, I swear I saw a humanoid figure less than 5 feet behind me. I could see a clear reflection of my face and body, and sort of an indistinct shadow that was considerably taller than me right on my ass. Turn around ready for a fight, and am greeted by the darkness. The only noise was the muted static from my radio. I noticed an odd smell in the air at this point, and shined my light around briefly to try and find the source. As I slowly walked back down the hall, the smell got stronger and stronger, and I suddenly stepped in something sticky and thick feeling. I flicked my light down and my boot is square in the middle of a puddle of congealing blood, coming out from under one of the doors. Turns out a kid had shot himself in his room over an hour before, roughly 2:30 a.m., but no one reported the noise or noticed the blood until me. The Catholic university I used to work at was one of the places the Japanese forces attacked during World War II. The building is old and historical, so it's not been renovated much. There are historical markers detailing what happened there in World War II, including the killing of multiple clergymen in one of the chapels in the university. This is why people say there are many ghost sightings there. I worked in the lab, so sometimes I'd go home late because some reactions don't work or just needs more work to perfect. One day I was going home late, around 8 p.m., and I took the elevator. The elevator doors were about to close, but stopped closing like there was something invisible that was preventing the door from closing. Needless to say, I got the fuck out of that elevator and took the stairs. I told this to my lab mates the next day, and one of the tenured professors who works in the next room from us told us she and other faculty members from the biology department has experienced this too. I currently work as a night guard at the front desk of a distribution center, 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. The room I sit in is loaded with windows facing the parking lot. Not very protected for me, but nice looking on the building. Anyway, I'm sitting at the desk, checking cams and watching some lobby TV when I suddenly hear, thunk. Total flesh on glass sound. Now you have to understand the lights are so bright in this lobby it's hard for me to see out those huge windows. I check the cams and see no movement outside the windows. Go back to cam/TV. Suddenly again, thunk. This time I shoot straight up out of my chair. Walk over to the windows and look out. See nothing. Return to post. Just start to sit back down and thunk. At this point I'm actually kind of pissed because I'm thinking someone is messing with me. A lot of the guys that work there like to pick on the female guards. I grab my radio and ID badge, have to swipe into the building, and go outside. There were 3 bats on the ground below the windows. I didn't touch them obviously, but I put a cone near them to deter other people from going close to them. Kept checking on them. No more thunks. Each one flew off into the night before I left at 8 a.m. at that day. I still don't know why they did it, why it suddenly stopped once I went outside. It was unnerving. A girl I used to date worked a nurse in the maternal unit, graveyard shift. A lady was giving birth, and she was losing blood fast. She ended up dying for a few minutes as the nurses ran to get her a blood transfusion. One of her nurse friends was working the check-in desk, and she saw a lady with one of those 4-walker things, walking in the hallway. That was unusual, so she called to the lady and asked where she was going. The lady didn't reply, but instead just walked in her room. Then, after everything was over, and the mother was revived, thankfully, the nurse at the check-in desk went to do her rounds and check on the mothers. The mother who had died before, was in her room sleeping. Turns out that the mother, during her 3-minute death, said she had an out-of-body experience where she was walking in the hallway and turned a corner into her room, where she saw the nurses reviving her. The nurse at the check-in desk basically saw her as a ghost during her out-of-body experience. I used to do overnight security at cemeteries during Halloween. Basically stay up all night sitting in a car, driving around every 30 minutes or so, shining a spotlight around, making sure no one vandalizes anything. One night another employee and I were driving around a large cemetery around midnight when we saw a kid, maybe 15 or 16, walking along a 3-stone wall that separated the cemetery from a major road. He was walking on the cemetery side of the wall, so we pulled up and asked him what was going on. He said he was just passing through and didn't want to walk right next to the busy road. It was midnight, there were no cars on the busy road, but okay. We told him he was fine as long as he stayed right next to the wall and didn't venture any further into the cemetery. We pulled away and drove about 10 to a turnaround with a tree in the middle. When we drove around the tree, maybe 3 seconds, he was gone. We looked everywhere. All along the wall, both sides, further into the cemetery, nothing. And this was a pretty flat, easy to see far distances in multiple directions kind of cemetery. We never saw him again. It still confuses me and gives me chills. It was just weird. At one point we convinced ourselves that he was a ghost who died by getting hit by a car on the busy road he was scared to walk beside, but, that's probably not true. Clowns. I work as a night shift guard on my campus. For a while we had students and townspeople dressing up as clowns walking around campus. On top of this I have to clear the art building, so I walked through the already terrifying sculpture studio full of dead philosophers and skeletons to close a back door, then walk outside to be faced with a clown. I can still picture the mask. He slowly started walking towards me, so I jumped back in the building with the locked door and radioed the full-time patroller. He saw what I was doing and started running. Later that night a group of frat guys with a baseball bat asked where he ran off to. As a security guard I probably should have told them we handled it and sent them home, but I just pointed in the direction he ran and let them go. My job in the Army was monitoring the cameras and other defense systems of the base. Night shift was from 0400 AM to 1200 AM. Only 2 of us the whole night. The other guard with me was resting for a bit. With nothing much to do, I start going through the cameras. Click, I chose the armory. In the main camera of the armory, from which you can see almost all of it, is someone. She is holding a gun very near to her head and is crying. I panicked for like 10 seconds and then call the night shift officer. I just kind of yell, "There is a girl in the armory and she is gonna kill herself." He then says, kind of in shock, "I thought I heard a gunshot." I turn to look at the camera and see the girl on the floor. The girl. A 18-year-old new recruit that got assigned to the armory and had a really hard time fitting in, had shot herself in the head and had died there. I was a state park aide in the Southern Californian mountains working the late shift with a coworker. We were getting ready to lock down the office for the night and chatting about the campfire programs that we were required to present. He was nervous and trying to figure out what would entertain people. I was telling him that campfire songs were an easy go-to when suddenly I felt a burning sensation on my hip. It was freezing. I grew up in Alaska, folks, but this was a cold that surpassed anything I'd ever felt. I immediately put my hand down to brush away the source and was surprised to discover that my keys were being inched out of my pocket. I looked back up at Matt to explain why I just slapped myself, and what I saw really shook me. He was standing, his eyes wide, his body rigid, and his arms were straight out in front of him shaking. I yelled his name and he snapped back, looking embarrassed. "I don't know," he mumbled. Something just passed right through me. Needless to say, we locked the office and pelted for our cars. The next day was even stranger. Every morning all staff would gather for a quick game plan meeting. Usually we would talk about rambunctious campers, trashed bathrooms, or the errant rattlesnake that had to be relocated. When the supervising ranger asked if there had been any events during the night, I looked over to see Matt shaking his head, eyes wide. I defied his plea and told the group about our experience. Rick, the ranger, didn't even blink. "Did you log it?" I replied. "You should make a late entry in the log," he insisted. He then went on to explain that the property had been considered officially haunted for years, and that if we went back through the logs we'd find entries not unlike what Matt and I had experienced. I finished out the summer at the park, but that was, needless to say, my last night shift there. I work security in a psychiatric facility, so we see a lot of weird stuff. It's sad for the most part, considering these people generally don't know what they're doing. This one time, I relieved my buddy who was guarding a violent patient. When I got there, he tells me to be careful with this dude because he's totally unpredictable. The guy had been wheeled in after stabbing himself several times in the chest and stomach to prove he wanted to die. So the dude is rushed into the OR and he's stitched up and the doctors save his life. So he's all hooked up to an IV drip and a catheter, and they've removed cords and wires, other than what he's hooked up to, so he can't strangle himself. The guy wakes up from the anesthetic and proceeds to rip out the fourth and catheter. There was a ton of blood. He then gets out of bed to find a tack that was stuck in a corkboard and gashes the hell out of his arms in another attempt to prove he wants to die. Luckily for me, he didn't do anything on my shift, but it had me on edge. It was creepy as hell because of how eerily calm he was about it all. Dude getting stabbed by his girlfriend cause he made her get him from work. His bike got stolen so he was stranded. I mean, he lied, cheated and stole as well, but she just screamed how she had to drive all the way. She only stabbed him a bit, so he refused to call the police and just left with her. Strange times. I used to work midnight shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., for years at an office park that consisted of 4 tall interconnected office buildings and a hotel, but they had their own security. These buildings also had their own connected parking structures. Very huge place covered by 4 guards. One dude walking around building 1 and 2, another roving 3 and 4, and driver watching the structures, and a guy all alone in the basement watching cams and controlling doors for the rovers and early morning delivery people. I've done all these positions and have stories for them all. So anyway, these buildings were pretty tall for the area they are in. Tallest one was mine and it had 40 floors. The office park was practically a ghost town after business hours. Once a month we had to check all the fire extinguishers in the building. I'd do this at 1 a.m.-ish. So I'd make my way to the very top in the engineer room, outside on the roof, then spiral down the stairwell to all the floors/offices till I hit the basement. I did this every 3rd and 4th Saturday for building 3 and 4 for years with nothing. But one time was very different. I finished about half the building on one of my monthly fire extinguisher checks. I typically did this with headphones and blaring music. I made my way down the stair onto the 25th floor. Been here plenty of times. A few vacant suites and a few big occupied ones like Yahoo and Aeon. The hallway and offices that normally had big fancy glass doors that let you see inside well-lit workspaces were pitch black. Only light source was the freakish red glare from the exit sign at the end of the hall. I feel a presence. I could feel eyes on me. I nope out and start fast walking to the end of the hall to get back into the stairwell when all of a sudden a shadow figure darts from one of the open empty suites doors down the hall around the corner and out of sight. I scream holy shit. And rip my earbuds out. I stand there frozen in fear and then holy fuck, this shadow slowly curls around the corner. It just ducked behind like it's peeking at me. I'm 10,000% shook and frozen in my tracks, prepared for what. The shadows moved again slowly. Then the floor lights up again like normal and staring at me is motherfucking Paul, the property's midnight building engineer Lamau. Scared him just as much as he scared me. Not the first time we did this, but it was rare just because of how many floors and areas there are. I used to work at an animal shelter and one day I came in for an overnight to monitor a few big litters of sick cats that came in. The shelter basically had 2 really long hallways, one for the public to view animals and one for the offices and surgery wing. I was doing miscellaneous cleaning duties in between medicating the cats and I heard meowing down in the surgery wing. So I walked down there thinking there was a cat spending the night in the surgery kennels that needed water or something. Nope, no animals were there. So I just assumed it was a cat somewhere else and I just thought it came from the vet wing. About an hour later I was sitting down with the kittens syringe feeding them and a black cat walked by the door. I figured it was just one from another room that got out and it can't harm anything to let it explore the shelter for a bit. After feeding I went to find its kennel so I knew where it went when I found it, but no kennels were empty. This is where I started to get creeped out. I saw the cat towards the end of the hall watching me, so I went to grab it to bring it to a kennel, but it disappeared almost out of thin air. I pretty much just tried to pretend it didn't happen because after all it's just a cat and it seemed friendly anyway. The next morning I mentioned it to the vet on staff and she said, oh, that's just Shadow, he died during emergency surgery a few years ago and he still wanders around sometimes. Whether or not it's true, it was still insanely creepy. I've worked security at a few different places and various other graveyard shifts. While I do have some interesting stories from them, the weirdest and most unexplained one comes from my current job of driving for a living. I work mostly graveyard type shifts at this job as well. I was driving one night with some customers. I get about a block away from our destination. For reference, this is not the greatest part of the city, and although it's a somewhat busy street I'm driving on, it's not very well lit. Because it's not a great part of town, it's not uncommon to see all sorts of random homeless folk or shady people wandering about. So I'm used to seeing all sorts of characters. So anyways, I'm driving these customers. I look over to my right as I pass this particular turnoff. It's one of those ones that has a triangle-shaped concrete island type thing that separates the lanes right as it meets the intersection. Standing on that island is this 12 to 13 foot tall cloaked figure. It was wearing like a ragged dark gray robe or something. Picture the Grim Reaper without the scythe. I slowed down as my jaw hit the floor because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. As I drove by it, its arm, for lack of a better term, raised its hand up and pointed in a seemingly random direction. Now I am the morbidly curious idiot from all of the horror movies. While freaked out by shit like this, I also want to get a closer look and understand what I'm looking at. However, I had these customers in the vehicle, who didn't see it apparently because they were engrossed in their own conversation, and I wasn't about to stop the vehicle in this shady neighborhood because I was seeing apparitions. I quickly dropped the people off and went back to the same spot to see if I could see it again. I had no such luck, as whatever was there was gone. I thought that maybe I had seen like a homeless person in a blanket. But then I realized that where it was standing, there was a one-way sign that the figure was equally as tall as if not higher. Unless it was Yao Ming in a top hat dressed as the ghost of Christmas future, I'm pretty sure it wasn't a person I saw. I worked campus security almost 2 years ago, had a pretty scary situation on a night shift. This is one of the scariest situations I've been involved in. Middle of winter, bit of a blizzard, high winds, snow blowing everywhere, the works. It's about 5:30 am. Shift is almost over when we get a call from a caretaker in one of our buildings. Now at the time there's only 3 of us working, me, my, now, supervisor, and my, now, TUIC at the absolute bare minimum before we have to call in for overtime. My supervisor is taking a turn on the desk, so he takes the phone call while myself and my TUIC are out and about patrolling, each with a patrol vehicle. So my supervisor gets this call from this caretaker who reports this dude is in the building sleeping and has been in there for a few hours. Campus has a no sleeping on campus policy unless you're in a residence building, fire code violation and all that. Not too unusual, but my TUIC and myself both head over anyway, as we usually deal with these calls in pairs. So we get there, I park behind my TUIC, and we walk in together. Very quickly we find this dude laying on some bench/chair combo thing outside some classrooms. Dude is wide awake. TUIC takes lead and starts talking to him. How's it going? Can I see ID? Building is closed, sleeping isn't allowed, etc. Fairly standard stuff, and this dude is confrontational from the start. Daring us to put hands on him, essentially trying to goad us into getting physical. At one point he gets so fed up with my TUIC, he is a fairly emotionless person and has almost a monotone way of talking in addition to not reacting emotionally to most things, an irritating trait when someone is trying to antagonize you, as this guy was. He goes, "I don't want to look at your fucking face anymore," while looking away and putting his hand up. Without missing a beat my TUIC replies, "You know, my wife would probably agree with you." Let me tell you, not busting out laughing was the hardest at that point because I just knew it would set this guy off. So this guy finally decides to get his things and leave, had a duffel bag, still mouthing off, "We don't care as long as he leaves," which we are trying to encourage him to do, when a screwdriver falls out of his jacket pocket. He picks it up, brandishes it at us. I now have a hand right at my panic button on my radio because I was now on edge and did not see this going anywhere good, and says, "You know what I want to do with this screwdriver right now? I want to shove it in your fucking face right now." Right after he says this, he turns and starts walking away. My TUIC beats me to the radio, requests police as he has now just blatantly threatened us. We start following at a distance and I begin relaying information to our supervisor so he can pass it on to police. As we follow him out, he walks by our vehicles. We quickly double check that we had locked them and slashes at one of them, leaving a gash in the door handle. This of course gets reported. TUIC and I hop into that patrol vehicle, as it was the one I was driving, and we begin following him at a distance in the vehicle, relaying his position so police can be updated with his current location. At one point he stops and turns to face us. I stop, still a ways back, and immediately curse because I am not in a good spot to turn around or move out of the way if he decides to come for us. Thankfully he just stared for a while before continuing on. We end up losing sight of him for a moment on a pedestrian path over a building, can't take the vehicle on it, when police arrive, no lights, and they hop out immediately with weapons drawn. We tell them where we last saw him and where we think he's going and direct them on the fastest way to get to the other side. They race over, TUIC and myself walk from where we last saw him towards where we told police to head, when I see him crossing the pathway at the other end. Seconds later I see the officers run up and I just start pointing at the guy. Officers take him down, cuff him, and dude starts singing like a canary and admits to everything. We move the vehicle to the other side while officers search him and put him in their car. At this point we're all shivering because of the wind and how cold it was, and they of course talk to us to get our statements. We talk to the caretakers to let them know he's been dealt with and what happened because they were understandably concerned, and the caretaker had a bad vibe from the dude. Shortly later we find out he had tons of ID on him that wasn't his, plus he was breaking curfew, and the icing on the cake was that he had just recently been released from a 7-year prison sentence for conspiracy to commit murder. Goes to show you never know who you are dealing with. I worked the graveyard shift for a building maintenance company for a summer a couple of years ago. This mostly included using small bumper car-esque street sweepers to clean curbs of parking lots, etc. On nights where rain was forecasted, we'd hit parking garages because we could pull our trailers into the entrances and unload without getting poured on. One specific parking garage was monstrous. It went 6 floors underground and was just plain eerie by nature. As I got deeper and deeper at this specific location, I would often sing out loud to the music playing on my phone because of how terrified I was. One night, a narwhal storm rolled in while I was halfway done with the parking garage. I didn't think it was smart to quit early, so I pressed on. On the lowest floor, the building's spot power went out and I was left in absolute pitch black darkness sitting on my shitty little street sweeper. I patiently waited about a minute for the generators to kick in and the emergency lights to flicker on before realizing that wasn't about to happen and coming up with a plan B. Whether my eyes were playing tricks on me or not, I saw all sorts of fucking insane shit while slowly motoring my way back up all 6 floors at 8 miles per hour using my phone's flashlight to guide the way. Ghosts of little children, creatures on the walls, critters skittering across the floor, people in the abandoned cars left on the lower floors, fuck. 2 years later, I still can't believe I made it out of there. I have spent the majority of my 6 years in security working graveyards, so I have seen some strange shit. The biggest was when I worked security at a chemistry graduate school. I was sitting at the desk keeping an eye on things when suddenly on camera I see a guy with a crazy hobo beard and wearing no shirt and camo pants walking down the hallway of the lab building, which you can only get in via keycard. I called for backup from another guard and then confronted him. We asked him basic questions and not for one moment was he ever hostile or angry, but at the same time I had that chill up my spine that something is wrong with this guy. Eventually we escort him out of the building and see him walk into the wooded area near the school. My fellow guard and I called police, who proceeded to go into the wooded area and arrest him. The police proceed to find on him 2 armies strapped to his thigh that he could pull out at any time due to having taken out the pockets in his pants, a gun, backpacks belonging to students of the lab, which is how he got into the building as one of them had it stole just a few hours before, and other items from the buildings. The creepiest part was the guy had a notebook with info collected about all the guards and how if he needed to what he would do to take us down if we got in his way. In fact, I was told I was smart to call my fellow security guard when I confronted the guy because he was armed with his pistol at night and probably deterred the homeless man from possibly doing anything. Especially since I found out shortly that Mr. Homeless Man was wanted for the murder of 2 people in Oregon 6 months earlier. I spent the rest of my 4 months on site always having eyes in the back of my head and my ears wide open. I worked as a supervisor on the grave shift in a call center. I was outside in the middle of the night sitting at a table on the back porch. I was on the edge of the building as that was where the door to get back inside. I heard a woman crying up front. I peeked around the corner past our generators and saw nothing. I considered checking it out but noped back inside. Nobody else had left the building while I was out. In our old building all sorts of stories were told. It used to be a bank, so we stuck receivers in the vault. Call center was in the same room on ground level. None of the women would go upstairs to use the bathroom alone after it got dark. They'd go in pairs. One night, I went upstairs to use it, and as I was in there, I heard the sink in the women's room turn on. No footsteps had come down the hall. You heard every step on the 2nd floor because it was old. I finished up, washed my hands, and knocked on the door to the women's room as the sink was still on. No answer, so I opened the door, it's empty. I turned off the sink and walked out. As I walked down the hallway towards the stairs, I heard footsteps behind me. I stopped, so did the other footsteps. I turned around, and nobody was there. Started walking again, same thing. When I got back down, I asked if anyone else came up. Nobody had. I even checked security camera footage, everyone else was at their desks the whole time. After that, when I would go upstairs to turn on lights after it was dark, no women would go up there without them on, I would take the back stairs and walk slowly down a long hallway to get to the switch near the other stairs for fun. I was doing my rounds and came around a corner and there was a giant black bear standing there. He had a trash bag in his mouth. We both kind of froze and he took off and I jumped up a wall. I moved to the mountain, so this wildlife is all new to me. Now it's not as bad because I see them and just yell at them to get out of here and they run away. If I see a mountain lion, I will just accept my death at that point. While in college I worked security at a dying/dead mall, and loved exploring the vacant stores, where power was cut off to them. You'd think I'd have stories from them, or maybe even the vacant theater we had on the property, but we were pretty good at what we did there, so stuff stayed locked up. However, being a young and dumb college student, I screwed up and was moved to a different location. This one was most currently haunted. Nothing evil though. I noticed something off about one of the areas on our patrol route, especially after the nighttime cleaning crew had departed. There were always sounds of footsteps, or someone moving about between the cubicles. The second week I was there, I noticed a light in an office flick on and off. I checked it out, but the office was empty. Then I felt a hand push me lightly from behind. I checked with the other guard. No one had entered or left the building in over 3 hours. We were all alone. On my next shift, I asked the cleaner for that area if she'd ever noticed anything weird. She asked, "Why, what have you seen?" I told her what I'd been experiencing and saw, and she laughed. "Yeah, there's a ghost, and it's a kid." She went on to explain before the offices and testing facilities had been built, the land was a farm. Back in the 1960s, a 9 or 10-year-old boy was killed in an accident in the barn, right where these offices were built. She explained he wants to play, so if you're busy, tell him and he'll leave you alone. Otherwise, if he pushes you, turn around to stand, say tag, you're it. He'll run directly away from wherever you are standing. It took me 2 nights to work up the guts to try it playing tag, but for those 2 nights I would announce I'm busy and can't play. When I walked into the area, didn't notice anything untoward. The 3rd night I walked in and slowed down. As I slowly walked along the windows, I heard footsteps behind me. I slowed further. When I felt the hand touch me, I turned around and yelled, "Tag, you're it." A breeze ruffled the papers on all of cubicle walls leading directly away from me. For the next 3 months while I worked there, I'd occasionally play tag with the kid. I felt bad for him. Worked overnights at 2 different 24-hour residential treatment centers for teens. I would be one of 2 adults in the building responsible for keeping the kiddos safe. AKA, Poltergeist soup. We, staff and clients, would see and hear things/people during the middle of the night, almost every night. I remember when I worked at a drug and alcohol rehab facility. It used to be a nunnery attached to a church. I used to hear women singing through our speaker that communicated with our doorbell for visiting hours. I could see through the window of the door from where I would be sitting, and there was never anything there. There was another microphone that talked to a room adjacent to the office I was in, which was all windows looking down a long corridor where the girls slept. The room this microphone was connected to was used for when they needed to take space or if we needed to get a client off the floor for safety reasons. It was always empty at night, because no one was allowed to sleep in there. There were just some beanbags and a rug. I would sit and listen to girls giggling and whispering through the speaker, but be watching the live video feed of the room in question, and it was always empty. I fucking hated that. I have a bunch more. Those places were full of weird shit. I've worked at Fox Studios for almost a year now. Before I got the job, I never believed in ghosts. I always had a good explanation for sounds or strange happenings. House settling, breeze closed the door, etc. Then the night finally came. I was a patrol unit, so I walked around all the office buildings and sound stages to make sure they're all locked and secured. First stop was stage 20. It has a big mural of a bunch of Simpsons characters on the front. At the time they were cleaning it out for a new sitcom to be filmed inside, so it was completely empty, completely dark, and completely silent. I do a quick patrol for the production rooms, and before I leave I ask the black void, "Is anyone there?" Immediately I hear 3 loud knocks against the far wall of the stage. I turn white as I feel my spine turn ice cold. I remain motionless for a few seconds, half in fear and half wondering if I actually heard it at all. A man's voice then whispers to me, "Get out." I whip around and there's no one there. It sounded like he was 2 inches away from my ear. I could feel his breath. I sprinted out as fast as I could. I went to my friend who was working the front gate and told him there's a ghost in stage 20. Before I told him what happened, he asked if I heard the 3 knocks. Apparently whenever the stage is empty and you ask if anyone is there, the ghost will knock 3 times. I now believe in ghosts. I have a couple others if this interests anyone. Throwaway cause big companies. So years ago I worked campus security for just the worst company imaginable. We'll call them Ballad Arton. It's not really relevant to the story. I just want everyone who is not in the security industry to understand how terrible they are. No one should ever feel safer just because Ballad Arton officers are around. At any rate, this was during that big clown sighting craze, where everyone was in hysterics and would swear up and down they saw a murderous clown lurking in the shadows. So one night it's just me and my shift supervisor doing the routine checks on campus when he got a call from some sorority ladies saying that they had seen a killer clown run off into the campus arboretum. So we go to check it out. My supervisor was probably around 6 feet 5 inches and 250 pounds minimum, so a decently sized mountain for sure. I, on the other hand, was about 5 feet 10 inches and 140 pounds at my heaviest. I felt more than safe with him at my side though. So naturally, the path ahead split into two separate trails. Supervisor told me to take the path on left, going slightly up the hill. I was nervous for sure, but didn't want to look like a wuss, so off I went. Now, because Ballydarton is the worst security company on the face of the planet, the battery to my flashlight started to die, leaving my maglite flickering the whole time. As I continued, I kept trying to reassure myself that obviously there wasn't a killer clown and it was just some bullshit hysteria sweeping the country. It's much harder to logically approach such a subject when alone in the woods at 3 o'clock in the morning though. Eventually, I heard a bush rustling on the hill above me, so I called out to see who was there. Sure as shit, two people come out of the bush, an average-sized male and a shorter than average female. The female was wearing a unicorn onesie covering her from head to toe, and they both reeked heavily of weed. I asked them if everything was okay, and they said they were just out for a walk. At that time the unicorn fell/slid down the hill and stopped a few feet in front of me. The guy lumbered after her and they just kept walking, a little more briskly now. I asked them if they wanted an escort back to their dorm, and they quickly declined. After they left, I made sure I wasn't in some kind of LSD trance and radioed my supervisor I hadn't found any clowns. We met back at the fork, and I went off to write the strangest report of my security career. Graveyard shifts are actually really nice and peaceful. When I was working security, the only thing that might happen is seeing a possum or something. In my experience, creepy shit usually happens during swings, 3 to 11, 4 midnight. Like people who were supposed to be gone are still hanging around, or they left but come back and seem nervous/give you a weird reason, etc. Also more problems with alarms at those times. Responding to multiple alarms, which normally means it's a real alarm at a disability medical office. Have to do a perimeter check first, all okay. Went inside, all okay till the last office in the far corner. Shat myself just entering, forced myself to check windows and then stepped into a shiny white tiled examination room. No. Ran out barely stopping to set alarm. Next afternoon workers heard someone whimpering in the roof. Turned out some stole a key and halfway though the break and enter got too scared and climbed into the roof and hid for about 12 hours. Don't know how he got in the roof and he didn't tell the police. Talked to co-workers, everyone had bad feelings about this building. A week later had an alarm there again. All okay until that last office. Hairs raised, I stepped in sensing something was different. Where's the desk? Next step okay. Next step off, fuck, my feet are stuck to the ground. Totally freaked out and sprinted out, breaking the main door on the way. It opened inwards and I forced it to far outwards and damaged the lock. Rang my supervisor and he came and got my keys and finished my run while I spent 6 hours scared as fuck by the broken door. Talked to the staff in the morning and it turned out they were renovating the back office as no one would work there. They were changing the carpet and had left the old glue on the cement. Probably will get buried, but years ago my husband used to do campus security at a university in our city. He said he only had one scare, and that was while he was patrolling the medical building. He turned a corner and flashed his light on what looked like a man. He got closer and realized it was part of a man's body, head and torso, embalmed in a glass case. I work overnight security at a wine production facility, winery with no tasting room that's closed to the public. Nothing truly scary or creepy, but I did get a good startle once. A pair of barn owls moved in a couple of years ago. One night while I was the only person on site, I was walking a patrol around the facility and I didn't know about the owls yet. Out of nowhere, I heard this unearthly shriek from about 3 feet behind me, maybe 5 feet up. If you have ever heard the sounds barn owls make, you can imagine hearing it out of context right on top of you in the middle of the night. They fly silently, so it came entirely without warning. Now that I know they're here, their shrieks don't faze me, but that initial introduction was jarring. Wasn't the night shift, but one time I was working at a gun show where the cops got called because some dude left a dog in his vehicle. When they opened the door, they found a shitload of weed and other paraphernalia. I wasn't told specifics, that implied that he was moving massive quantities of dope or was otherwise tied to some serious shit. Naturally, this is not the type of person that should be looking for a gun, so the cops were told to find the dude and bust him. They did. Unfortunately, I don't know what happened to him after that, but considering that what he was doing was very fucking illegal, I wouldn't be surprised if they threw the book at him. I was a camp counselor at a place for 4th, 6th graders in Oz over the summer. I often had to stay up most of the night to make sure the kids were in their bunks and safe and everything. The camp was up in the woods. Yes, northern Arizona has trees, so I was mostly just making sure javelina didn't sneak into any of the cabins, or that the kids weren't dumb and walked out into the woods in the middle of the night. So one of the nights at about 1 in the morning, and after a few nights of not really sleeping, I was too tired to stay awake. I made one more round so I knew the kids were all asleep, and then I headed to my bunk to get some rest. We each had these wooden cabins, not too big and no air conditioning, which meant opening the windows, but it was a place to sleep. Anyways, it was a pretty restless night. I woke up a couple of times, and one of the times I woke up sitting up in bed, which I thought was odd. Considering how tired I was, I thought I would have been out until morning. When I was finally up for good, I felt pretty groggy. Went straight to the shower and got it hot as it would go and got in. I opened my eyes after standing in the water for a few seconds, and there was blood dripping from my face. I looked down, and there was blood everywhere. It was all over the shower tile, and it was all coming from me, I figured out as I ran out and looked in the mirror. It was all dry, but all over my face. All down my chest. Practically covering my hands and arms. I was terrified. From what I could tell, there were no cuts or scrapes anywhere on my body, and the blood looked like it had started around my mouth, but no cuts. It was all in my teeth and beard and no sign of where it came from. And it was definitely blood. I've hurt myself enough to know the metallic taste. I got back in the shower and got it all off of me and went back out to my bed to see if it was in the sheets. And to my surprise, it wasn't really. Sure, there was some, but if I had blood coming out of me, it should have been all over the bed, right? Nothing. It's like it was already dry on me when I got in the bed. Worst part was right after. I looked at the window my bed was in front of, and there was a red blood looking streak that was definitely not there the day before. On the outside of the window. One of my buddies walked in and saw the look on my face and asked what was wrong. Told him the story, and he got freaked out and was wondering if I went out in the middle of the night and ripped apart a javelina and ate it. I told him that he was disgusting and I'd never rip anything apart, much less eat it. To this day I have no idea what happened.